Brad Edwards, I hope all is well. Welcome into the game in T-Town.
Yeah, thank you. No snow on the ground here. Actually, we had some a few weeks ago. It's all melted off, and got to tell you, that's a blast from the past. That song. I mean, no telling how many times I've heard that in my life. You know, growing up in Mississippi and Alabama, and when it first started playing, I was thinking to myself, like, wait, I know this song. What? Because believe it or not, they don't play that on the radio here when they start playing Christmas music.
Why is that?
So I'm hearing Christmas in Dixie, and after the words first started, all of a sudden it hit me. That's what that is. And I miss home.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Well,
thanks
and I guess I need to ask you, how did you get adjusted living in the South all of your life, attending the University of Alabama, growing up in Jackson? Like, what was the acclimation period of just shoveling snow? At what point did you kind of get over that this was just the norm?
Yeah, you know, the funny thing is that growing up in Jackson, I don't know about, most people who grew up in Alabama, but one of the stations that we had was WGN, the Chicago station. And so I used to watch that a lot as a kid, and you'd see the weather on there, and they get these huge snow drifts. There's a lot of lake effect weather, being so close to the Great Lakes, actually right on one of the Great Lakes. And I just assumed that's what the weather was like everywhere in the north. And so I was expecting that type of stuff in Connecticut. And it's not that bad. I mean, in fact, I would say that the biggest difference between winter here and winter down there is that once it gets below freezing, it stays below freezing for like 3 or 4 months, which is, that's the biggest adjustment. It's the cold. Certainly we get a lot more snow here, but it's not like it snows for days on end. It'll be a, snow storm will come through and it'll dump, several inches, and then it might not snow again for 2-3 more weeks. So, it's been the cold. And then, of course, the other thing is, like, if you're not used to snow, then it's really exciting when it happens. But when you do get used to it, it seems great until you have to either shovel it or drive in it. And then you start to hate snow pretty quickly. And I've been there for a long time.
I gotcha. All right, Brad, let me give credit to The Athletic. There's an article here that's been a major topic of conversation in the college football world, and I want to make sure that we kind of cite our source here. With Barry Alvarez, we don't need to wait another 6 years. College football leaders ready to discuss 18 playoff. Do you have any thoughts of when we hear this college football expansion talk, playoff expansion? What's your thoughts when you hear conversations like this?
Well, I think what you're hearing is a very honest reflection that there are some people and some entire conferences that aren't very happy with the way this thing's going almost halfway through this contract now. We're 5 years into what's a 12-year deal, and I don't think that anyone in the Big Ten would have ever imagined, especially after Ohio State won the very first playoff in 2014, that 5 years in, the Big 12 champion would have gotten into this thing more times than the Big Ten champion has. Now, that has everything to do with Oklahoma, but still, I don't think that the Big Ten would have believed it if you had told them that their champion would only be in one more time in the next 4 years. But that's what's happened. Obviously, the Pac-12 has kind of been left in the dust by the other power conferences, and they're really struggling right now. And like I said, with the Big 12, you take away Oklahoma, and, I mean, is there another team that even would have threatened to get in the playoff if Oklahoma had just lost one more game here or there over the last few years? So, and look, I mean, truth is, even though no one in the ACC is complaining, you could say the same thing for them. If Clemson were, one game worse in the loss column some of these years, the ACC wouldn't have had a team in because there's no one, threatening Clemson there. So I think that even for the conferences that are kind of doing okay right now outside of the SEC, there's reason for concern as you look ahead. And then I think the big one is UCF for some people, which is, they look at going undefeated 2 years in a row and not getting a chance. And, Bruce Feldman, who you may be familiar with, who also works for The Athletic, I heard him make the comment this week that if you can go undefeated 2 years in a row and not get into the playoff, then why do we even say that you're in the same division as the other teams? I mean, you've got 130 teams in the FBS, and supposedly they're all under the same umbrella. But if you can do what UCF has done and you still don't get the opportunity to play for it on the field, And why are we pretending that these teams are actually in the same league, so to speak? And I think it's a great point. And so for different reasons, people are interested in, looking into it. I still have a hard time believing there could be enough consensus gained within the next year for us to see some sort of expansion after the 2019 season.
Brad, in your opinion, let's say that we advance. Would it change the outcome? I mean, do you think the outcomes would be any different than what we've seen in the first 5 years?
No, and I don't think that's what this is about. I don't think that they're believing that there are teams that have a chance to win the national championship that are getting left out. In fact, I think college football is very different than other sports. College basketball, I think, is pretty obvious given the upsets that you see in March Madness. College baseball, people who follow that sport closely just know just the nature of the sport, baseball. It doesn't lend itself to the highest ranked teams having much better of a chance than the next tier of teams. But football is very different. And I would guess if we had 20 years of an 8-team playoff, it would be incredibly rare for anyone seated outside the top 4 to win the whole thing. I mean, very rarely is there even a number 5 seed that I think, has a case that they're legitimately good enough to win 3 straight games against teams of that caliber. So I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's more of the participation element of it, whereas I don't mean that in the sense that people just want their participation trophy, to say that they were a part of it. But I think as far as the sport, it might be detrimental to college football to have certain segments of the country, be disinterested, especially the West Coast. I mean, right now, there's no hope in sight for them. And the only way I can see them getting into the playoffs is, for them to get an automatic berth. And look, there's some things I can look at and say these would be positives. There are other things I can look at and say they'd be negatives. I mean, let's look at it from the Alabama perspective. If you have the best team, what you don't want is to have to go out and play a quarterfinal game in which you're favored by 3 touchdowns and risk injury. Because I mean, let's be honest, the only way I think, I could be wrong, but the only way I can see anyone other than Clemson, I've really felt this way all season long, once the playoff arrived, assuming Georgia wasn't going to be there, the only way I could see anyone other than Clemson knocking off Alabama is if Alabama had injury issues and wasn't at full strength. And if you go out and play a quarterfinal game, it's just one more opportunity for some of your key players to get hurt, which kind of levels the playing field. And I don't think that's what people want to see either. So there are definitely pros and cons. And I think the biggest thing, and I haven't read the story yet, so I don't know exactly how much they got into, but I think the biggest issue with expanding the playoff is when do you play the quarterfinal? That to me, where you try to jam it in the calendar is a huge stumbling block.
Brad, I want to ask you if this is feasible. We feature Coach Stallings here every week, and he brought up something a couple of weeks ago, and we've asked about him several times, and he loves the conversation of giving some home games to some of these teams. In other words, you would create more value for the regular season that it would matter if you're however you want to line this up. Could you, because you know the ins and outs of this, could you ever see that would even be a feasible option of allowing some of these teams to play home games in the playoff games, like inside Bryant-Denny Stadium, if they're the number 1 seed or whatever the seeding you're setting up?
Oh, I think you have to. In fact, to me, it's really not even an option to do it the other way. We're already asking a lot of fan bases to have to travel to consecutive neutral site games in the current setup. And look, when you have teams like Alabama and Clemson that have been in this playoff several years in a row, and I guess Oklahoma is now there, 3rd time in 4 years, these fan bases have spent a lot of money following their team around. And if you throw on a quarterfinal that's also at a neutral site, as part of the bowl structure, you're asking way too much at that point. And I think you're going to get burned, because what you're going to end up with, especially with these fan bases that are used to being there, they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to save my money. I'm going to take my chances that we win this quarterfinal game, and then I'll go to the semi or I'll go to the final. But I'm not going to go to this first game. And you're going to end up having, these huge pockets of empty seats in the stadium, and it's going to look really, really bad. if you try to do it neutral site. So I think you have to do it, for the campuses of the higher seeded teams. And that, I mean, number one, it's incentive for having a great season, gives you that home field edge. And I think especially when you get down to the end, I think a lot of people have asked this question, like, how does it affect the regular season? Does it hurt the value of regular season games if you expand to 8? And I think one scenario that people like to play out is, what if you have a conference championship game? And let's just say that it happened to be 1 versus 2. And this year's SEC championship game wasn't too far off of that, where you feel like, okay, whoever loses the game is still going to be in the playoff. And so the question comes, well, why does it matter who wins? Well, the reason it matters is because the loser may very well have to go on the road for the first round of the playoff. And if you're a Southern team, and that means you might have to go to Ohio or to Michigan to play in the cold in December in a quarterfinal game, I'd say it matters a lot who wins the SEC championship game. So I think in a lot of ways, having those campus sites enhances the playoff itself. Now, here's where it becomes an issue, though, is that by doing that, what you're doing is you're taking 4 of the top 8 teams in the country, in theory. And I'm talking about the quarterfinal losers, the 4 teams that lose the quarterfinal games. You have removed them from the entire bowl structure. So 4 of the best 8 teams in the country will not play in a bowl game of any type, and there's going to be a trickle-down effect as far as the quality of the bowls because of it. And I mean, to me, I don't lose any sleep over that, but I know how big the bowls are to some people who are in the decision-making process, and that could be a deal breaker for them.
Brad, the one thing that I want to go away from this college football playoff expansion just for a couple of minutes, I don't want to get in the trap of just saying Oklahoma's a bad defense, but I continue to try to find ways to think that this game is going to be close. Defensively, every time I try to study Oklahoma, I'm just not convinced that they can stop Alabama. I think Kyler Murray will have success against Alabama's defense, but I don't know if it will equal the times that Alabama's offense will have success against that defense. Are we underestimating the quality of that defense? Is it as bad as it looks?
It is. Yeah, in fact, last year, Oklahoma was the worst defense to ever participate in either the playoff or even going back to the BCS championship games all those years before it. And it really wasn't close. They were ranked 59th in our defensive efficiency metric. This year's Oklahoma defense is ranked 92nd. So they're a whole nother level of bad compared to last year's defense that got torched by Georgia. Now, there are a few things that I think could make them not seem as bad. One is, even though the news has been encouraging, we have not heard or seen, Tua back on the practice field to have any level of assurance that he would be 100%. And even if he is, how many times have we seen him, limp off the field during games this year? So if he's not 100%, that changes things a little bit. And I think the layoff also does. Not only in that, any offense has a chance to come out rusty after so many weeks without playing, but the defense also has an opportunity to just kind of look at extra film, more days to review and try to see things that you think you might be able to do. And I think with Oklahoma, what they're going to have to do is take some chances. They're going to have to be risk takers and roll the dice in a few occasions and do something that's kind of unexpected. And that might mean that they end up getting burned for an 80-yard touchdown, but they can't just sit back and let Alabama score a touchdown in 10 plays, as opposed to playing their normal defense and allowing them to do it in 3 or 4 plays. What they have to do is try to find a way to break serve, and if that means forcing a turnover or trying to get a big sack, then that's what they have to do. Because ultimately, for Oklahoma to win this game, they've got to keep Alabama out of the end zone on several possessions. How many, it really depends on how well Oklahoma's offense does against Alabama's defense. But I think that's the biggest challenge, because everything you look at, like I was looking at what Alabama did to kind of second-tier defenses this year. Not any of the ones that are ranked behind Oklahoma, but the ones that are not in the top 20 but are ranked ahead of Oklahoma. And these are teams like A&M, Tennessee. I'm trying to remember who else was in that group, but there were 4 of them. And Alabama averaged a little bit over 50 points at the end of the third quarter against those teams. And they were averaged almost 10 yards per play for the first 3 quarters. And I did 3 quarters because typically that's when the first team offense came out of the game. And then I think there were 16 of 18 scoring touchdowns in the red zone. And the only 2 times they didn't score a touchdown were both drives that Jalen was in on. One of them was the Arkansas State play where he fumbled, like right at the 1 as he was going in. So, I mean, it's just Alabama's offense this year, when they've been healthy and played against defenses that were a little bit better than Oklahoma's, they just absolutely scorched them. And we all wondered what would happen if they left that offense on the field for all 4 quarters. Well, given what Oklahoma is capable of doing when they have the ball, we might actually get the answer to that question, because Saban might leave them out there, and I don't think it's far-fetched at all to think Alabama could score 70.
You really believe that? 70 points?
If Oklahoma keeps scoring, if Oklahoma gets into the 40s and forces Alabama to keep going, because look, Oklahoma, and this is kind of where a lot of people nationally have a hard time, is because Alabama's offense is different from what we're used to it being. And the idea nationally that Alabama offensively is better than West Virginia and Oklahoma State and Texas Tech, they're not used to that. But that's the truth. The truth of the matter is these offenses that we have seen torch Oklahoma over the final month of the season are not as good as Alabama's offense. And that's what's scary. And look, and those teams had to play offense for 4 full quarters, and they were scoring in the 50-point range. West Virginia had 56, I think it was. So to me, there's absolutely no question that if Alabama is forced to keep the pedal down for 4 quarters, they could score 70.
Brad Edwards, ESPN college football insider analyst for College Game Day on ESPN Radio that you hear here on Tide 102.9, part of ESPN Stats and Information Group. Brad, as always, thank you again for loaning your expertise to us for about 15 minutes. Greatly appreciate it here in Tuscaloosa. Thank you, sir.
You got it, Ryan. Take care.